Hi everybody. Well, we are back. It's been a couple weeks. We took a little break from our textbook and did a little project on minimum wage. But we are now back. We're diving right back into part 2 or volume 2 of the book. So everybody should have a new book now. And now we are ready to rock into the world of algebra. So what we are going to do is we're taking all of that knowledge and that experience with rational numbers that we had before break, and we're now going to apply it into the world of algebra. So this past week we began with algebraic expressions, but I wanted to show students where this was all headed. Okay, so we started the week, really, I showed them what the ultimate goal was. And the ultimate goal of this entire unit that we are diving into is we want to now be able to solve a multi-step algebraic equation with variables on both sides of the equation. So students came in this year in 6th grade, they have already solved equations like this. We would call this a one-step algebraic equation, where all they would need to do is perform one step in order to get the variable by itself, like I just did here. So notice the one step was dividing by 3. So that's a one-step equation. Well, the equation that I just showed you, as I just said, our goal this year in 7th grade is now to solve multi-step algebraic equations. So in 7th grade, the standard is, they actually talk about a 2-step algebraic equation. But we, in my math class, since it is an advanced math class, we're going to take it a step further. And I want students to be able to solve an algebraic equation with variables on both sides, like I showed you before. So to start off with, we don't dive right into this. We take it piece by piece and we build, as we do in every unit. So to start off with this unit, we got rid of the equation and we made it into what we call an algebraic expression. So an algebraic expression, notice, is part of an equation. But as we talked about in class, it's not a complete sentence. It's not a complete thought. An equation is a complete sentence, something that we can solve. In this case, this is a part of that equation. It's just, as we call it, an algebraic expression. So in order to solve this expression, we need to know what x is. So what we did is we started off with something called evaluating algebraic expressions, which means we talked about the word evaluate. So if I'm going to evaluate this, I'm not going to just go ahead and I'm going to solve it. I'm going to look at this expression first and see if there's any way that I can make the expression easier. So as I said before, we need to know, well, first of all, what is x? Okay, we can't solve this if we don't know what x is. So students were given the value of x. So in this case, I said x equals 2. So what students would do is they would plug in that 2 for x, and now I can solve this expression. So this expression would be 3 times 2 is 6, plus 5, and this, notice I'm making like an upside down pyramid. This is how we taught the students how to simplify the expression to make it short and short until finally we're left with just one number, my solution. So this is how we started again this week, just looking at evaluating algebraic expressions, okay, like this. From there, we then reviewed something we actually reviewed a little bit last week, and that was the distributive property. Okay, so the distributive property is something that students are going to use a lot next year in 8th grade pre-algebra, a lot in high school in algebra, and beyond. It is a very, very important property. So we spent a lot of time reviewing the distributive property to this week now, so that students can now apply it into this algebra unit. So to start with, we looked at a very simple example of using the distributive property, which students do naturally, or a lot of people do, in their mind. So for example, if I were to give you a problem like this, let's make this 45. So if I ask students to multiply 3 times 45, some might be able to do it in their head, but when people do it in their head, a lot of times they're actually using the distributive property, and they're breaking this number up into something that looks like this. So instead of doing 3 times 45, we're going to do 3 times 40 plus 5. Now, why would I do that? Because I can now apply the distributive property. 3 times 40, a little bit easier to do in your head. So I know that 3 times 40 is 120. Plus, I know 3 times 5 is 15. And I can simply add these two numbers together to get 135. So even though I may be doing this in my head, I'm actually applying the principles of the distributive property. Notice I'm distributing that 3 with the 40 and with the 5. And this is the property that we're going to use now in our algebra unit. So what students did is they looked at problems like this. Okay, so now in this case, I can't evaluate this expression because I don't know what x is, so I can't solve it. But what I can do is I can simplify it. So what I would do is I would distribute the 3 with the x and the 5. So I would do 3 times x, which is 3x, plus 3 times 5, which is 15. Now this next week we'll get into something called combining like terms, which simply means I can combine things that are alike. Well, if you look at this, these are not alike. So this is 3x, which really means x plus x plus x plus 15. Well, I have no way of adding these 3x's to 15 because I don't know what these x's are. So instead of writing out the 3x's like I just did, we would just leave it as 3x plus 15. And I have now simplified this expression. So the purpose of working on simplifying these expressions is so that when we get into these big nasty equations, like I said we're going to get into, these multi-step equations with variables on both sides, we can begin by simplifying them, by making them simpler, and then it will allow us to solve them a little bit easier. So we're going to continue this next week now, working on just simplifying these expressions using the distributive property, doing things like I just mentioned, combining like terms, so that we are building again towards the following week when we actually start digging into these algebraic equations and solving them. So that was our week. It was a good week. I look forward to another great week this next week, and hopefully we're celebrating a Packers win on the road to the Super Bowl. All right, have a good week, everybody.